Welcome back, everyone, to another episode. Today we are diving into the legal side of egg donation. And I'm super excited to go into this piece because I think it's going to be really important for all of you on the egg donation side who are watching, who want to know the legal implications of what you're going to do or what could happen if you're donating your eggs or your embryos. So I'm really excited to talk to Chris today. Chris is joining us from Shorebreak Law. And before we say hello to Chris, I just want to let everybody know that we are filming live in our offices. So from time to time, there can be some noises around us, maybe even one of our staff walking by to say hello unintentionally. And that just means we're on scene in the office. And so, you know, noise and background new staff members come and say hi from time to time. So just letting you know about that. So Chris, thanks so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to have you here.
I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to it for a long time. And I hope to see people walking by because this is where the magic happens.
It is where the magic happens. And, you know, the magic for you on the law side happens in your office and I imagine on the computer and over the phone. Before we get into some of that good detail, tell me, how did you get into this side of law? Like, it's probably not something that you decided on when you were your first day at law school, right?
No, not at all. And this was a common refrain I got in law school. What made me want to become a lawyer originally was I watched A Few Good Men. And seeing Tom Cruise just work that courtroom, and then of course the famous scene with Jack Nicholson, you know, you can't handle the truth, and I was like, that's what I want to do. And then when I went to law school, I got a job in a family law firm doing divorce, child custody, that sort of thing. And because that's where I had my initial round of experience, that was the type of work I got when I graduated. And then when my oldest son was born, he had some health problems, and in order to have some schedule flexibility, I decided to leave the firm I was at. My wife and I made the joint decision and start my own shop, basically. And what really was my catalyst into all of this was when I was a kid, my mother was a surrogate. She did 2 separate journeys as a surrogate, and this was long enough ago. This was before IVF was really mainstream. So her first pregnancy was AI, artificial insemination. And that was a singleton delivery, San Francisco couple, really wonderful. And then she did it again, that was IVF. And she ended up carrying twins. And ever since then, she has worked in the field, primarily as a surrogacy coordinator. So she has interviewed surrogates for years, helped guide them on their journey, been that shoulder to cry on and person to talk to and all that sort of stuff. So she knew a lot of attorneys in the field. And when I started my own shop, I was fresh out the gate, right? I was looking for work anywhere I could get it.
Sure.
And she said, hey, I know all these wonderful attorneys that do this. Let me connect you with them. And I went and I mentored with them, and I sat in their offices and listened to them do the work. And slowly over time, I got some cases kind of sent my way. And organically over the last 6 or 7 years, it's just grown and grown and grown.
That's awesome. I have this image of you thinking that you're going to be in the court. And, you know, I just see A Few Good Men in my mind, and you're doing nothing like that right now.
Not at all. Not at all. And frankly, I think that's for the best, because we all have this idealized idea of what we want to be when we grow up, right? And then when you start experiencing it, it might be different. And doing the divorce work, that is very court intensive. There's a lot of time in court, fighting, dealing with very adversarial clients, and it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. Not in the sense that there wasn't a lot of fun, you know, objection and all that stuff, but the schedule is hard, especially when you have a young family. There's emergency court appearances that you have to be ready to drop everything and go do. I'll be honest, dealing with toxic relationships all day
that's not easy.
Is not great
Yeah.
For my style of work-life balance. And so being able to move into this, which it was actually a wonderful opportunity to move from family law, traditional family law, into assisted reproduction, because the courtrooms are the same. A lot of the court paperwork is the same because we're all operating under the family code. So it's not like I had to learn an entire new code of law to practice it. It was almost like speaking the same language.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, look, even though the law has changed for you and it's not the movie scenes that you imagined as a kid, the work I imagine right now is much more rewarding from dealing with couples that are breaking up and families that are breaking up to really creating families, right?
Absolutely. And both provide an incredibly important, resource for people.
Sure.
Like the divorce lawyers, they're needed, right? It's just sometimes it's stressful for everybody. And this job can certainly be stressful too. There's cases that don't always work exactly as planned, and then you have to mediate that and work through it, which is great. I do enjoy that. But it's 100% something that I fit. It's a puzzle piece that I fit better with, for sure, doing the assisted reproduction stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, I think those individuals who are wanting to donate their eggs, potentially wanting to donate their embryos that they have left over from any given cycle, many of them would wonder, why do I even need an attorney? Why can't I just donate what I want to donate to an individual or couple who might want it? So how would you answer that question to them?
Well, and this harkens back to the family law experience that I had. When you're determining parentage, which is what all of this is going to lead to, right? Having a child and being the official legal parent of that child. There's a number of different ways that we can do that. One of them involves genetics, right? So if you donate embryo or if you donate eggs, your genetics are out there, potentially resulting in the birth of a child that will not be yours, right?
Sure.
So theoretically, somebody could say, well, you're the genetic parent, you therefore need to be the legal parent and all the responsibilities that come with that. So you need to ensure that you're following the correct steps to make sure that you will not be judged to be the legal parent, right? Now, a lot of this is all worst case scenario, but that's why lawyers exist, right? We protect people from the worst case scenario.
Yeah. And is it different? And I know we're talking about two slightly different things in terms of an egg or an embryo, but legally, is it different if I'm donating an egg or an embryo?
Not necessarily. Your genetics are still attached to that, right? If it's gametes, two gametes in an embryo, there's somebody else involved. And the vast majority of time, it's going to be a live donation for eggs, but for embryos, they're typically already frozen, right? And depending on if it's a bank, that will be different than if it's a live couple donating to a third party, or if they're donating to a bank, or if the bank is giving to intended parents as well. So the end result will always be the same, but you have different things to consider depending on the specifics of where that embryo or those gametes are coming from.
So when you say it's different in terms of slight technicalities of how you manage the paperwork and the legalese to communicate that.
Correct. And this is going to sound a little bit weird, right? But we're talking about ownership of gametes. And it's not often something that people think about when it comes to a child or something like that. It is ownership. And of course, it's not a child. It's an embryo. Or some of my colleagues are trying to shift the conversation from calling them embryos to pre-embryos. Right?
Okay.
So because they haven't been implanted or anything like that, let's call them pre-embryos. And part of that is the shifting nature of politics in some of our states around embryos.
I can understand that, yep.
Right. So
okay.
we're trying to be cognizant of how we approach that in some places.
Valid, very valid. Okay. You did mention slightly, and something that I didn't think about, but you mentioned the difference between frozen and live, or what I would call fresh. Now, I'm seeing a much higher amount of frozen eggs being used and donated than we ever did in the past. Does that change things legally?
That's actually an interesting question, and it's something that some of my colleagues have been bringing up now, because the situation that you're talking about is a donor, a woman, donating her eggs not to a couple, but to a bank.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And that is a blurry area when we're talking about parentage. So you can have a gamete donor, like an egg donor, providing her gametes to a couple. And that's very clear, okay? The donor themselves will never have parentage, okay?
Right.
If it's coming from a bank, the bank can't have parentage. So what is the legal status of those gametes when they're with the bank? And can the bank give parentage or assign parentage to the couple, because the bank never had it to begin with? So it's something that it's never been an issue. Nobody's ever had it run across where this is something that enters litigation. But it's something that some of the lawyers in the field are like, we should probably look into this and make sure that there is no potential loophole for somebody to say, well, the bank can't assign parentage because they never had it to begin with.
Right. So it's kind of like in limbo, in that in-between state?
I don't want to make it seem like it's that much of a loophole where it's in limbo. It's just because it hasn't been clearly defined by a statute or any precedent that's out there, because it's never been litigated. It's like maybe we should consider litigation, or not litigation, but legislation, to kind of cut that off before it ever becomes a problem.
So it's not even a problem?
No, correct.
Yeah. If you are working with a donor, whether it's egg or embryo or even a bank at that point, how long does the process take for those individuals to go through the legal side of things?
When we're talking about gamete donation, eggs and sperm or anything like that, typically not that long, because the contracts, and bear in mind, I'm comparing this to surrogacy contracts, right?
That's a whole different ballgame.
A typical gamete donation contract is 15 to 30 pages. Okay. A lot of that is dry stuff. We're talking about insurance and so on and so forth. So it's not something that takes terribly long to draft. What typically takes the longest is the review process. How long does it take for the lawyer to get with the donor or to get with the intended parents? Have the full review, which is typically an hour to 2 hours on the phone or Zoom or what have you, discussing, hey, this is what this means. This is what you're signing up for. Are you okay with that? Once you complete the review process, normally you can finalize and sign that contract in a few days, typically.
Okay.
But the drafting and the review, in my experience at my firm, that's typically from start to finish, from match information being sent to legal clearance being granted, typically 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay.
We can go faster. Sometimes it takes longer.
Got it. And well, the time frame is actually not as long as, other legal proceedings, so to speak. So 2 to 3 weeks is pretty reasonable, considering everything that has to be handled there, right?
And it all depends on the attorneys, right? So I'm saying the ones I'm involved with typically take 2 to 3 weeks. And to be honest with you, the longest time is typically the intended parents and their review process, because they're the ones who are typically, if they're having to pay a bunch of money, they're going to want to discuss every aspect with their attorney about the entire contract, where typically the egg donors are more concerned with what are my responsibilities.
Sure.
So it's double the complexity on one side versus the other side normally.
Right. Makes sense. And you did highlight that you review the agreement with the donors that you're working with, or even if you're working with intended parents, you're going to sit down and review it. Is that something that's pretty typical for you, to sit down with them, review each component, each piece of the legal agreement?
Absolutely. And the typical workflow goes, I receive either the match information saying there's a match here, and then I reach out to the egg donor, or in some cases, if we're in a rush, I'll get the contract first. And so then I have to reach out to the donor, I have to introduce myself, I have to make sure she wants to work with me. Right. And once we kind of do that housekeeping first, I'll send her the donor agreement. I'll instruct her to take as much time as she needs to read it first, because I want her to have that base of knowledge before I show up and start talking legalese at her, right? Once I'm convinced that she's had the chance to read it, because some donors, in their enthusiasm, will be like, let's do it, let's sign it right now. I'm like, no, we don't do it that way. The end result of this is a legal clearance, which is me putting in writing to the clinic and to the agency that I believe the egg donor knows what she's doing, what she's signed up. She's fully informed of what's going on, right? I'm not going to put my name to that piece of paper unless I have reached to my satisfaction that she knows exactly what's going on. So it's oftentimes me who's having to slow them down and saying, hold on a second.
Right. They're just ready to plow through.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm good.
And fair, right? It's a very exciting thing. So many girls are really looking forward to this. They've been thinking about it a long time. They've already had to deal with all the medical stuff. So they might have been percolating this for some time. And then here comes the boring old lawyer to be like, hold your horses, I do deal with that quite a bit, but it's a good problem to have.
Yeah, and it would make sense that you've got to basically sign off and saying, yes, she's cleared to go, she understands what she's doing, and I approve. So that makes sense.
Because every attorney in this field, their worst nightmare is a client coming back to them saying, like, you never told me about this,
right,
or you never explained what this meant. So that's something that we all take incredibly seriously. Like, no, even if you don't care about this now, I'm going to make sure you understand what it means.
Sure. Well, and very, very important. Maybe you have a story to share about this, but I imagine there's regular questions, the most common questions that get asked, or interesting questions that you never thought would come up for you. What are some of those, and maybe you've got a story to share that or use as an example?
The most common question that I get, which is great, is questions about medical insurance or medical expenses, right? You would think that, the first thing that I would get asked is, am I allowed to drink alcohol, or am I allowed to do this, that, and this? But no, a lot of donors, thankfully, are very educated on this. And they're like, okay, what if there's a problem? Who pays for it? And so then you have to explain, okay, there's actually multiple levels of care and coverage for you. Here's how it all works. And that's typically what we will spend a good amount of time on is worst case scenarios.
Worst case scenarios, yeah.
Let's talk
but from
about
the
that.
medical side.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And then there is something else that we talk about a lot is anonymity, right? And
Sure.
there's still a prevalent use of anonymous gamete donation contracts out there right now. Understandably so, right? Most donors, when they do this, they're thinking, okay, I'm going to donate to a family that they won't track me down later, the child won't track me down. But that's something that we have to talk about a lot more these days. In 2023, is there really anything such as true anonymity?
Sure.
With the 23andMe's and the Ancestry.coms. And then something else that people struggle to understand sometimes as non-attorneys is there's no privy of contract between any future children and the egg donor.
Right.
The children aren't signing this contract.
No,
They're not agreeing to
anonymity.
They could look.
Right.
So that's something, and most donors, to their credit, are hip with that too. Like they get it. They know, okay, yeah, that's fine. So those are the two things that I normally spend the most amount of time talking about.
Okay.
With gamete donation contracts in particular, the compensation terms often aren't overly complicated. And when I mean complicated, there's not a huge structure of being paid at different times for different things, whereas surrogacy contracts are the opposite. There's a
That's
ton
different.
of million little payments for that. So the compensation discussion is normally pretty quick. Here's how it works. You get X at Y time, that sort of thing.
Okay. Well, you jumped ahead to something that I find really fascinating, especially in the world that we live in right now, which is, privacy or the type of donation this is going to be. There's different variations of donations where you can have a closed, open, semi-open. What are you seeing? What's the most common that you're seeing? Is there a change happening? Let's kind of go there.
Definitely still the most common in my practice is the anonymous, right?
Okay.
There is a shift moving towards the semi-open, which you mentioned.
Yep.
That's kind of seems like now that people realize that the cat's out of the bag, that anonymity is kind of a thing of the past, we can keep it anonymous, and then in the future, people have the ability to request to open it up, or maybe it will be planned to be opened up once the retrieval is complete, that sort of thing. There are some attorneys in my field that are staunchly against anonymous contracts because, correctly, they say this is kind of fool's gold. Like there really is no way to enforce this, so why are we calling it that and that sort of thing? But I also agree that it's deeper than just what do the attorneys feel about it, right?
Sure.
There's all kinds of psychology on both sides where they would still feel more comfortable keeping it anonymous as best as possible. There's also a growing movement to consider the rights of donor-conceived peoples, right?
Right.
These children and these eventual adults, they have rights too. So should they have the ability to find out who that is? And how are we going to tackle that moving forward? So that's going to be interesting to see play out over the next 10, 15 years. Are there going to be like donor-conceived bills of rights and that sort of thing, which there are groups out there trying to do?
Oh, I'm sure it's in the works.
Yeah, super
Has
fascinating.
to be. Yeah.
And that's one of the fun aspects of this type of law, where a lot of divorce law has been set in stone for 100 years. All this assisted reproduction stuff it's like the Wild West in a good way. There's a lot of development happening. The medicine is advancing, so we have to keep up with that as a legal field. And it's a lot of fun seeing this stuff grow with me.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you seeing the request for an open donation more so from the intended parents now? Is that where it's being pushed from?
I would say it's actually more coming from the professionals, because we as the lawyers and the agencies, we understand that anonymity is a thing that probably is moving into the past, but a lot of donors and intended parents don't really understand that yet.
Right.
They are on their own journey, and they're kind of just going off of what they've learned about it on the internet or through seeing it in the past, that sort of stuff. So they don't really understand this is developing right now. And we will often educate that. So a big part of my reviews is talking about that. Hey, this contract is anonymous, but here's what that really means, what it can mean in the future. Normally, I'm on the egg donor side, typically, so that decision has already been made, right? But when I talk to my intended parents as they're approaching this process, I will explain the same sort of thing, and I'll say, hey, it's up to you. Do you want to have this open? Do you want to have it anonymous? Many agencies kind of have that as part of their program to begin with. So when you show up to be matched with a donor, right, the agency will say, hey, we're an anonymous program, typically, and so that's what we're going to work with. But if you want to semi-open it or open it at a different point in time, we'll always have the opportunity to do that. So it's definitely more the professionals, I think, that are leading that charge as of right now, rather than it coming from the clients.
Yeah, I've seen a lot more of a push in that direction in the last year or two, and I imagine that's just going to increase over time. So it's interesting to hear you say that and from your perspective and how you're seeing things. So I appreciate that.
Because a big part of what we do is concerning ethics, right? What is the most ethically responsible way to do this? And that's why the change kind of has to come from us as a field, right? Because we always want to make sure that we're doing everything to the best possible ethical standard that we can, because we don't ever want that, news story about how one of these things goes wrong or have our decisions second guessed in the future.
That's not why you want to be in the news.
No, exactly. Yeah. So it's like, all right, it's hypervigilance at all times. How are we doing this the best way possible, the most ethic way possible? Let's make sure that we're doing it like that.
So, Chris, I know that law is different once we cross borders, both within the United States and internationally. How does egg donation, embryo donation change? I guess let's start first in the United States. How does it change within the states, from state to state?
Widely. Not so much with egg donation in particular, but the end result can vary widely state by state. And we're talking about parentage, right?
Okay.
Every state, there is no federal law in the U.S. that controls how surrogacy works, how the parentage orders are made. That all comes down to the individual state's family code, or in many states, their court precedent. So a previous judge or a previous court had made some ruling right now. So whenever we craft our contracts, we are always looking towards that end result. How do we create our story, create our journey from gamete donation to embryo creation to pregnancy to parental rights, right? Because when that child is born, if it comes out of one lady, but we want the parents who are somebody else to get that birth certificate, how do we do that? And every state has its own flavor of doing that. Some of them, like California, for example, are statutory states. We have legislation in place with laws that say this is how it's going to work. The vast majority of states are just precedent. They exist. We've done things this way. Other courts have accepted it based on this protocol, so we're going to follow that protocol and we'll be fine, right? Egg donation is the very early phase of that, so there's often not as much, legislation or precedent on that.
Okay.
But with that said, we still need to know if that state does have a particular set of rules that we need to follow. Let's do that. But normally, we're just primarily focused on parentage when it comes to a live birth.
And how often are you primarily working with...
Sorry, that was me. Didn't know it did that.
And how often are you working with couples that are in California or throughout the states?
Honestly, I would say it's a very even spread.
Okay.
I would always prefer to work with California clients if I could, but that's just because it's a little bit easier for me to work with laws and statutes that I'm already familiar with.
Sure.
I have, at this point in my career, worked in quite a number of states, so I know how those work. I'm not licensed in those states, so I can't officially give advice on those laws or what have you, but we're always going to be working with an attorney in that state in our contract process, so they can verify that we're complying with the law or the protocol for that particular
So there
state.
might be two attorneys.
There's always going to be two attorneys, because each side will always need to be represented by competent counsel.
Okay.
Because if not, then you're running the risk that the other side will say, well, I didn't have an attorney, how was I supposed to know what I was signing up for?
If an egg donor reaches out to you and they're, let's say, in Texas, would one individual, let's say this donor, need two attorneys?
No, not the actual, each client would need their own.
Yeah, okay,
or
so that
would
part,
need two.
right.
You would need one on the parent side and one on the donor side.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. But you just mentioned that, you're not licensed in every state. And so if a donor reaches out to you who's in Texas, would you even take them on?
As long as there is some nexus to California law, because typically even if the donor is in a different state, we're going to be doing our donation in California.
In California, then yes. Okay.
Correct.
Got it. And does everything you just mentioned about different states also bode true for different countries?
Yes. When it comes to every different country, they all, again, will have their own laws, their own protocols for determining citizenship, parentage, that sort of thing. Because I'm not licensed in any of those countries, always at the outset, before we're even doing contracts for anything, we always say consult with an attorney in your own country so that we can know, and I will communicate with those attorneys as well to make sure that whatever you need in your home country to establish parentage, I am setting you up for success. I'm giving you the order that will say the words that you need it to say, or we'll give you the birth certificate that's structured the way that you need it to be structured.
Great. And if there was an egg donor listening right now or an embryo donor listening right now, what's one or two things that you'd want them to know or hear that you'd like to share with them?
Well, first of all, thank you, right? Having worked in this field for as long as I haven't been around it, basically my entire life, you really appreciate how personal this is. And being a parent myself, right, and having dealt with, like many couples, pregnancy loss at some point, it really is special that these people are willing to do this and give so much to help other people achieve the dream of parenthood, right? And this is something that doesn't get talked about enough in our country or anywhere in the world, but when you have that struggle, it's incredibly debilitating, and there's not a lot of support out there in the wider world for people going through this. It's getting better, thankfully. But having somebody that is willing to give you that gift to allow you to start that parent, like, thank you. That's absolutely the first thing that I would want them all to know is you're doing an amazing thing. Like, great. It's amazing. Thank you. Keep doing it. You're going to make somebody's whole life, somebody's whole generation, right? Their family for years and years to come, for 100 years, is happening because of you, which is nuts to think about.
Yeah, it's a huge impact.
Yeah. And then the other thing would be trust the professionals that are working with you, and not just the attorneys, the agency, the doctors, right? They are doing this because they're good at it. So listen to their advice, follow what they're telling you to do, and you'll be just fine.
Awesome. Now, I know because we've chatted off camera that you have a personal story along these same lines. Would you mind sharing that for all of our viewers?
Yeah, so we've already talked about how my mom was a surrogate and whatnot, but through that same connection through my mom, when I was dating my wife at the time, she had just moved out to California from Pennsylvania, and she decided she wanted to be an egg donor. And of course, we were all thrilled about it and whatnot. So my mom helped her. We interviewed different places, and she found the one that was a good fit for her. And it was interesting for me because when my mom was going through all this, I was a little kid. I was, 6, 7, 8. So I don't remember a lot of the specifics. Mm-hmm. And then getting to see my wife go through it was really cool. Now, I wasn't an attorney at that time, so I didn't pay enough attention to the legal side, which now I wish I could go back and, I don't even know if we can find a copy of her contract anywhere, but I'd be interested to read it. The matching process, she was a live donor giving to a live couple. Mm-hmm. And it was a homosexual couple from Norway. Mm. And my wife is very Nordic, tall, blonde hair, blue eyes. And so, of course, they were tall, blonde hair, blue eyes. So it was a natural fit.
It was a good match, mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I remember I had to help her with the medication, which, to be honest with you, I wasn't very good at it. I did it the first couple times, and after that, she was like, you suck at this. I'll just do it myself. And then for the retrieval, I drove her down there. The retrieval itself went great, but then she had the twilight afterwards when she was coming out, where she was under observation first, but then I took her home. And so it was a lot of fun seeing all these things that I kind of remembered as a kid, and then seeing them in practice And now looking back again, kind of seeing it from the perspective of the lawyer, like, oh, we did everything right. We followed everything we were supposed to do. And then now, so that she produced, I want to say 27 or 28 eggs at the time.
It's a fair amount.
Good amount of eggs. And that one couple has since then gone on to have 5 children via surrogacy. And they're all living in Norway, but they occasionally come to visit, normally when they're coming out to see their surrogate or whatnot, who's in California as well.
Okay.
And we've met up with them a couple times. Those kids have played with my kids. It's really cool, really neat. The one weird part about it is they look much more like my wife than my kids do, because I have my sturdy Welsh genes that apparently overcome hers. So my kids they do look like her, but a little bit like me. But these kids look spitting image of my wife and her brothers, which is really neat.
Wow. So this was an open donation then?
Yeah.
Yeah. And was that more common back then? Or was it something that they specifically wanted and she agreed to?
So that particular agency at the time that we were working through, they didn't really do anonymous at the time. But anonymous was more common back then. It's just now becoming a little bit less common as people are realizing that it's sort of a thing of the past.
Yeah, and I mean, it sounds like both of you are comfortable seeing those kids and have had that interaction and have done it repeatedly, correct?
Yeah. But that probably comes a little bit from my experience growing up around surrogacy and that sort of thing. Whereas it's completely valid for other people that would prefer not to have that much interaction.
Yeah.
Everybody's opinion on that is their own, and it's super valid, right?
Sure.
But for my wife and I, girlfriend at the time, we were totally on board with doing it open and whatnot.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's a great story to share, so thanks so much for that. I know it's personal, so thank you. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to come and meet with me in person and to share your expertise, share your personal story and history in this field. I know it was really special for me to hear it and really helpful for me to hear it, and I am sure that for all of our listeners that they appreciated it as well. So thanks so much for joining us, Chris.
Of course, I'm happy to be here. Like I said in the beginning, like coming to the clinic where the magic happens, I mean, compared to what I do, paper, ink, like it's very important, right? But it's so blasé compared to like the cutting edge medicine that you see and seeing all the people in person. I really enjoy every time I get the chance to visit a clinic.
Thank you, everyone, for watching. I appreciate you joining. If you've got comments or questions on this episode, please go ahead and post those down below. If you want more information on Chris and his law firm, then you can go to shorebreaklaw.com, and we're going to post that information down below as well. If you like this video, make sure you give us a thumbs up. And if you're not a subscriber to our YouTube channel, please make sure you subscribe by hitting that bell and getting notified when we put out another video for all of you. Again, if you want more information on Your Eggs, you can download the Your Eggs app or go to youreggs.com. We'll see you in the next video.